That's a good question, what you were saying about fragmentation of knowledge. Fragmentation of knowledge, why is it bad? First, because at the end, as I said, you are specialized, but you don't have the overall understanding. And you sometimes are very specialized in one field. And the instruments, remember Einstein, who at the end saw that what he was producing was used for the nuclear bomb. I say, if I had known, because in that field, then it was used for other ends, other goals. This is why it's bad. Is it possible for a Muslim to have all this together? That's not possible. What was possible for somebody like Ibn Rushd, for example, being a philosopher, a physician, and others in the old time, is no longer possible for us. If you are specialized in religious field, it's going to be very difficult to be specialized in all the fields. So you can and you should have the basic understanding in your as to your religious reference and in your field, that you can do that. So whatever is your job, at least you need to have an ethical framework, the rules that are needed to be able to navigate into that field and to know. At a certain level, you will need people who are more qualified, either in your field or in religious reference. And this is why it could be but collective. So anything which has to do with scholars today coming and giving us fatwa with no members coming from a specific field, for me it's problematic. And when they are telling me, when I published the Radical Reform, they told me, but all this is not, we do this. We have people giving us report about the questions. Saying that report is nothing. You're not going to get a sense of the reality. So it's not going to be an individual. You can't do this. In whatever is your take in the way you are trained, it's going to be at one point superficial. It's not enough. So we need to bring a collective dynamic among scholars. But at least at the individual level, you should be religiously equipped with what is necessary for you to be autonomous. You should be autonomous, meaning at one point you should be equipped to deal with the challenges of your own life. So this is also something which is important for the basic questions, but also in your field. But what is happening today is that many Muslims, they know just what is necessary to practice, but when it comes to their profession or their job, they are far from even making a link between this and that. This is schizophrenia. Yeah. It's true. I think that those who are laughing, they know what I'm talking about because they might experiencing it. So I can turn it against you now. The challenge. Are we at the periphery of both? Look, I agree with you that if we look at the Muslim majority countries and the centers or the traditional centers are in the Muslim majority country, it could be Al-Azhar or it could be al-Qura and others. If you really think that this is the center, we have to reassess our judgment. Nothing is coming from these institutions now. It's repetition. And even the people who are trained there, they know that. Many. But there is the power of the symbol. For example, I had scholars. I didn't go to Al-Azhar University. I have Azhari scholars. And I took the traditional way of being taught. So 1-to-1, and then you get the ijaz and all that. But at the end, it's because I was able to go outside the institution that I had another type of teaching. Because within the institution is superficial, outdated, not connected to the reality, and mainly repeating. So the center is itself far from the center of the deep question. In the beginning of the 90s, I was saying something that I now think it's critical for us. It might be that the critical questions to the center are going to come from the periphery. So in fact, us in the West, at the forefront of these new challenges, now we might have to come with answers that are coming back to the center. And they are less equipped than we are now. We are not enough equipped as to the religious institutions and training the scholars, training the ai. This is what we have to do now. And we were talking about that. We need, and I spoke about this in Western Muslims and the Future of Islam. The third step of our presence is institutionalizing our presence. Institutions where training and having this. So this is our job, knowing at the same time that what I'm saying here, there is a risk. That if I look at many of the Muslims who are now based in the West, the great majority, the huge majority are much more concerned with their position, their salary, and their protection. It's what I call the new age of the petit bourgeois Muslim. I'm talking about you. But that's the reality, is are we taking this historical experience to use the instruments, to get back to the methodology, and to ask the real question because we are at the center of this critical discussion, or are we just expecting that the West is acknowledging that we are nice people? That's a deep question. It's critical. And this is where I think that our historical experience, willing it or not, the great majority of the Western Muslims are going to enter into what I was now describing. It's recognition, being perceived as good Muslims, dismissing some of the values and some of the behavior. But I'm quite confident, and I really think that through all what we have seen over the last 30 years, there is something in our historical presence in the West which is going to bring about something, another dimension. So I would say that the first thing to do is not to think that we are at the periphery. It's to position ourselves in an assertive way at the center of the whole struggle to renew our understanding. And not, because, it could be the victim mentality. We are in between two worlds. Look at us. We have no say in the West, no say in the Arab world or the Muslim world, so we are nowhere. And it might be, no, but that's a critical psychological positioning that when I was saying this in the 90s, I was saying the periphery is going to be essential. The periphery is going to, my brother was always saying Muslims are not going to be free unless they free Saudi Arabia. So the center, go, do. I was young. I'm banned from there. So that's true, by the way. But anyway, I really think that it might be the other way around. That we really have to think about our experience elsewhere and how much we are equipped. Look at the second, third, and fourth generation of Muslim in the West. Some of them are equipped. They have the freedom. They have the status. They can do something. So this is why we have to change this by saying, no, I'm sorry. If you want to put me at the periphery, I will show you that we are at the center. Because we are at the forefront. And I'm not going to accept this victim mentality of saying, I'm not part of the whole thing. And I would tell you something. Take it as it is. All what you see coming from all the Western governments telling you integration is failing, it's because it's exactly the opposite that it's working on the ground. What is happening on the ground is not at all this. It's that you are becoming more visible because it's working. They keep on having a rhetoric telling you it's not working. You are not. It is working, and we are going to get out of the social ghettos, the intellectual ghettos, the financial dependency. This is going to happen. And this is why they are so aggressive. By telling you, we want Muslims without Islam. Now we have to show that we are able to be Muslims with Islam, being European, being British, and now we are going to play a role not only for Muslims here, but questioning the whole system and the methodology that we have around the world. This is why I'm concentrating now. My next book is called A Manifesto for an Islamic Liberation Theology. Yeah. But that's exactly this. Okay. So the question was about the pragmatic way. Who was asking the question? Is how do we? So you are right in a way. I have been in so many committees and commissions, and you can see that it's very difficult. And even with, when I wrote Radical Reform, I had lots of questions. And by the way, many people are saying, so many questions, you don't have an answer, because I'm not a specialist in economy and I'm not a specialist in environment. I studied the basic questions, but now I need specialists to come. And what I realized over the last 3 years is that what I was saying during the break is that you put the scholars of the text, you put the scholars of the context, you put them together, they don't understand each other. They don't speak the same language. They don't have the same. So there is a gap. And especially with the scholars who are trained in a very traditional way, they don't get it. So now we are focusing on younger scholars, and we need to work with them and to bring them together. And it could be that scholars that are trained in the West and at the same time in Islamic traditional institutions. So we need now to try to find this link, this connect between this connection between the scholars, and then to be also pragmatic in the way we are trying to translate this. So it's very difficult because it means that you are talking at the same time about renewing the methodology and finding the scholars who are able to understand that. And when I'm talking to you like this, there are some scholars and ulama, young, and people coming from the different fields, political sciences, experimental sciences, and human sciences, that get the sense of what we can do and in which way we have to reassess the whole question. So pushing the people not to be observers of what is happening, to be much more involved, and to try to be equipped, it's something which is important. Now, for the time being, there is one thing which is a failure, is that the concrete answer that we may have to concrete question now, we are very far from producing something. It's still very general, very theoretical, and this is where we need to be much more involved. But I don't know if in the last book, the book that you have here, and in the previous book, in the Radical Reform, I really think that we are ending a cycle now. That the 20th century was, the revivalist movement and renewal and tajdeed and ijtihad was something which is, but we are ending now. We need something which is new. So I'm just participating to the end of the cycle. That's real. I reached the limits of what I can produce, thinking that now what we need is younger generation scholars who are being able to come with something which is new on this, with all what we were doing, but putting themselves at the center, not at the periphery.
Go for another second round.
About the first question, Muslim majority countries and Western Muslims, is it relevant or not to still refer to this? Yes and no. I think that if we speak about what we are talking about now, I think no, we should not make this distinction, because our experiences in the societies today are quite the same, except that some are misled by some symbols and some are happy. You say, in the Islamic context, in Muslim majority countries, you have al-azan. By the way, you can put it on your computer, that's fine as well. So I think that the context and the culture, and even in some Muslim majority countries, the daily life, it's not as Islamic as as that. So I think that all these symbols and this perception at that level, it's different in our discussion now. Now, in daily life, with some of the challenges that you have in Muslim majority countries, and within the majority, when the Muslims are in majority, there are still different challenges sometimes about the way you deal with the references and you deal with the current culture. I would say, for example, that in Muslim majority countries, the relationship to power is different. The relationship to culture is different. Especially, for example, you know, you go to an Arabic country and they look at all the rest of the world as not being very much Islamic because they are not at the center of the Arab culture, and first Islam was coming from an Arabic culture. So it's an Arab culture, and Arabic was the language of the Quran. And that's the problem. When I'm saying this to people coming from Pakistan and Bangladesh, they like it. When I'm saying, you know what, it's true that Arabic is the language of the Quran, but the Arab culture is not the culture of Islam. I say, yes, yes, good. Say it again. But then, so I repeat it because I know you like it. But at the same time, you come to Britain, and the way the Bangladeshi or the Pakistani are dealing with the British culture is exactly the same as Arabs are dealing with the Pakistani and the Bangladeshi culture. I say, yes, it's... And then you have somebody who converts to Islam. Yes, Muslim, but still British culture. So it's Islamic, but not like our Islam. Our Islam is more authentic because it's the Urdu language, the Pakistani and Bangladeshi culture. So we are all projecting onto others exactly the same attitude. But what I'm saying here is that you have to take this into account because the cultural setting has an impact. So I would say some of the challenges in Muslim majority countries are quite different from the challenges. I wouldn't say the challenges, but the priority in the challenges are different. So you still have sometimes to deal with questions. So for example, when I go to the Middle East, in some Muslim majority countries, I can feel that the relationship to the rest of the society is quite different. For example, here in the West, when it comes to, you know, it was said that I don't like the concept of minority, and I don't like it when it comes to citizenship. But there is something that we were told, and myself, when I wrote in the beginning of the 90s, I wrote to be a European Muslim. What was told to us is you have to abide by the rules of the country, the legal framework. So in fact, you have to integrate into the legal structure of the state. This is what we heard. And we try to think about fiqh in the way, how are we going to fit within the legal? And in fact, this was not the question. This was a misleading question to avoid one which was deeper than that in fact the question is not if you abide by the law, but because the Muslims are abiding by the law, it's the sense of belonging to the nation. The problem is not with the state, it's with the nation. And some are looking at us now in the West by saying, yes, you have the passport, but you don't really belong. They are creating an informal status of foreign citizen. And this is difficult. It's difficult for them to put us within the common narrative. This is why prevent and everything which is said about political Islam is British values. As if you, as Muslim, you have to prove not only that you abide by the law, but you share the narrative. So you are within the state, outside the nation. And that's the reality of it, which is exactly what Trump, to Cameron, to Holland, to all of them, they are doing exactly the same. Or they are saying exactly the same. I'm saying this why? Because then you go to Muslim majority countries and you see that the way they deal with religious minorities is exactly the same. I was in Malaysia and dealing with Muslims say, you know what, I talk to so many people of other faiths, and they feel that they have a second-class citizenship because they are not part of the narrative that you're creating, the Malay culture, which is Islamic. So you are doing the same. So I would say here that sometimes this arrogance or this lack of understanding of what it means to belong to, it's exactly happening the other way around in Muslim majority countries. So it's not exactly the same. And I'm using my experience in the West to go to Muslim majority countries and to question exactly this, that at the end it's not a question of legal equality. It has to do with equal sense of belonging to the nation. The fact that you can say we. Who told me this? Who taught me this? All the messengers and all the prophets being rejected by the people and talking to them say, Ya qawmi, my people. So that's also something which, so I agree and not agree with the whole thing. I think that on some issues we have to avoid this, and especially when it comes to fiqh, and especially when it comes to the level of our discussion here. Now, implementation of Sharia. I'm not saying that Sharia or the legal framework is not essential. For me, the legal framework is essential. But for me, Sharia, it's a concept as it is put here. And also, it's the path towards faithfulness. So I would say exactly the opposite. Instead of thinking, do we have to implement Sharia? I would say Sharia is already implemented the very moment you say La ilaha illallah wherever you live. So you live in Britain and you say La ilaha illallah, you are a believer, you are implementing Sharia. A Shahada is to be a Muslim. A Sharia is to remain a Muslim. It's the path. You start in Sharia. So for example, people didn't understand and were saying, you know what, I abide by the law of the state here in the UK. It's my Sharia. When it's said in the legal framework that we are equal before law, that's me. That's my Sharia. Everything which is good is my Sharia. Everything. So Sharia is based on the good and the human and interests, masalih al-nas. So it's my Sharia. So we have. So the point is not to reduce it by saying you start implementing the Sharia when we come with the legal framework, which is wrong, or the penal code, which is punishment, which is completely wrong. This is just the other way around. I say when you start with freedom, education, no freedom without education, responsibility, equality, and justice, that's your Sharia. And anything which is coming from another source, culture, or society, or legal framework, implementing this, it's yours. So I would say exactly the opposite. By to be able to say this, you have to redefine Sharia. Exactly. So you know what you have to do in Britain, what you have to do in your life is to claim again the authority on the definition of your terminology. Sharia, jihad, even governance, pluralism, shura, equality, men and women, all these things, we have to be able to do this, and we have to reassess this by coming with a very powerful discourse based on your own definition. For too long now, our terminology or our notions were translated by either Orientalists or Muslims who were not understanding the context within which they were living, and they were giving us reductive notions. So linguistic jihad. Yes, there is an intellectual jihad and a linguistic jihad. I'm struggling with this. It's true. It's serious. You know, this is politics. Language is power, said Foucault. And he is right. Who is deciding the meaning of the words? So yesterday you were telling us Nelson Mandela was a terrorist. All of a sudden he is the freedom fighter and the great man in the world. Who decided that? That the very people who were putting him in jail and supporting the government, the United States of America, they wanted to go and to visit him before he was dying. The same. Who decided this? The people that yesterday you were telling us they were freedom fighter against the Russian in Afghanistan, then you were supporting them. Bin Laden was the first that you were supporting. Now they are the terrorists that we have going to bombard because they are the worst on earth. So, but at that level, it's very clear. In our daily life, it's exactly the same. Who is deciding? Who is defining? Who is giving us the terminology? If you don't do this, if you, based in the UK, being able to stay 2 days here in a seminar, meaning that you have the knowledge and you can build and construct something which is a universe of reference based on your terminology and your definition, if you don't do that, who is going to do it? Who is going to do it? You have to come with this very powerful presence. No, jihad doesn't mean this. No, Sharia, it's not this. And be careful that you have some Muslims playing with the words against what we are trying to do. Even, for example, you have Islamism. I'm teaching this at Oxford and say, what do you mean by Islamist? You're putting everything. It's completely, it's a mess. You are confusing, but it's in fact, it's not because of ignorance. There is strategic ignorance as well, as much as you have strategic diversion. So be more equipped. But I think that this is why, I'm sorry, I take one question and I go for other things, but look, extremist group. Who was asking this question about extremist groups? Yeah, it was. Look, there are limits to the way you are going to unite people. Some of them are not going to even accept in the way they are dealing with the leaders of the extremist groups. They don't even consider you as having the credential or being part of the whole discussion. So I think that when it comes to a dialogue, we should be humble and know the limits. It doesn't mean that we have to cut communication. We also always try and try to think about the methodology and the way they are dealing with the scriptural sources. But at the end, where, for example, we have been studying what was produced by Cile, produced by Daesh, they are referring to some verses. Whatever is your methodology on this, they are not going to listen, the great majority of them. So it's very difficult with the leaders. Now, what we can do is to work and try to convince the followers and to try to enter into this discussion with the followers. And this is where I don't disagree with you. I think that we have to work on both. You have to work on the methodology because this is critical, knowing the overall message, and also the goals, what Islam is all about, because this is part of the message. But speaking about the goals is not going to help us in this very specific issue, on in this specific type of dialogue that we may have about some of the extremists. But once again, I see and I understood, you know, over the last all these years at the grassroots level and dealing with Muslims, that you have to be you need to be realistic with the people with whom you can talk. And because it's going to be very disappointing. I tried once, I went to the southern Egypt at the time I was studying. It's very difficult, because they don't even listen to everything that you are saying. Is that they take one verse and then the methodology is what you are trying to say is by connecting the verses and getting the whole message is just you are destroying the message. So they don't even listen to what you have to say because the verse that they are referring to is so clear. This could be one thing. And there is another thing which is where I found myself helpless, is with people who really have been radicalized, and I use here the word becoming extreme and radicalized because of their experience with repression. So whatever you are going to say is very difficult.
So with the leaders of some of these groups, are you saying they don't have a methodology at all?
They have, but it's just not at all going to be, they are not going at all to hear what you are going to say, because it's a literalist extracting some verses, so they have. And sometimes, some of them are completely distorting. For example, they are quoting Ibn Taymiyyah and others, and they are distorting the whole thing. So some are sincere and equipped, and when you come to them, they are just saying that your methodology is not rooted in the Islamic tradition. They don't even listen to you. It's just dismissing what you are going to say. Some others are not so sincere in the way they are quoting, and you come and you tell them, Ibn Taymiyyah is not saying this in such a way. You cut the reference. They don't want to listen. So you need to know that at that level it's going to be very difficult with some of them. But I also want to tell you that sometimes with some extremist interpretations, it's not only the methodology that has to do with the text, it's also personal and historical experience that we also have to take into account when you come to this. For example, in southern Egypt, the one who just told me it's over, there is no discussion between me and the government, is that there was a sheikh that we loved so much. He was trying to bring us all together, Christian and Muslims in the region. They came during the Jum'ah, and while we were listening to him in the mosque, they entered with their shoes and they killed him in front of me. Now, you say whatever you want, no discussion. These are criminals. We are going to fight them. So now you can come with all the methodologies that you want. It's not going to work. It's another dimension here. But I'm saying this because many of our young people, when in 3 weeks and 2 weeks, they fall into something which is a very violent way of dealing with the sources, we also have to be very, very cautious not to confuse the methodological question with the personal experience in some of the situation. So quickly, what you were saying about the moral epistemology and the moral framework that could be missing. Where are you? Here. You are referring to the extremists as well. Yeah. Once again, here, it's true that if we had, and if it's possible, to produce an ethical framework or an ethical frame of reference that could be convincing by showing, we are responding to you by saying all what you are doing it's against this. It could be interesting. It's not going to have an impact. Why? Because the great majority of these people, in the way they deal with the scriptural sources, is trying to get the ruling and the legal opinion. They don't care about the morality and what you are saying, because morality is a step beyond or a step before. So what we want to do and what we want to know, it is Islamically possible to justify resisting, oppressors or killing people. Do we find in our tradition justification for killing people, killing non-Muslims, the way they put it, or to kill colonizers, or to kill the enemies of Islam? Now you come with the ethical ground, they say that's fine. You might come from Switzerland or might come from the UK, it's not going to work. They deal with the legal justification. So you can see that in fact, all what I was saying this morning about the primacy of the legal framework is also playing in the field of this literalist understanding. So I don't see our discourse on the moral framework as being efficient in dismissing their point. I don't see it, because they don't care. Because they would say, look, some scholars said is legitimate. And the point is to be serious about that, that if you read the Islamic tradition and you read some of the scholars, many things have been justified in the name of Islam when it comes to violence. We cannot deny this. Many things were justified, and in the way it was perceived in a very specific context in our history. So you have to reassess that. For example, we talk today about defensive resistance. Resistance which is a defensive way. That's true. But no one can deny that in our literature, from the very beginning, we had scholars supporting offensive, that you can go and you can open. Al-Fath is something that was there. So this is where we have to not to deny what was produced by our scholars, but to reassess with the understanding of the moral framework and the understanding of the overall message, even as to the rules. And for example, the deep discussion. I know that some of the Muslims didn't agree with me when I was saying, you know, I was banned from the United States of America for 2 reasons. This is what the Homeland Security told me when they came, say, why are you saying that the resistance in Iraq is right? And I said, yes, it's right because you are wrong. You have nothing to do there. That it's a legitimate resistance to wrong and illegal occupation. Second, are you supporting the Palestinian resistance? Yes, and the Palestinians are right to resist the Israeli colonizers in the occupied territory and everywhere, because this is a colonial project. This is something that I added here, is the resistance is legitimate, and my point is the means should be legitimate. Killing innocent people in Israel, it's not for me morally defendable. Which was putting me at odds with Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi and others, and I had a discussion, I said, and I repeated this, I think that's not the right way of putting it. For me, you have the right to resist, but your means of resistance should be as ethical as the goal of your resistance. But that's not enough for the United States of America, of course, and even by saying, we have to be courageous here. When the people are saying you have to condemn violence, you say, yes, we condemn violence, but please, we have to make a difference between legitimate resistance to occupation and violence coming from Daesh. So for example, when Sharon was saying, now you know what it means, what terrorist means after 2001, and equating this with Yasser Arafat, or today saying Daesh and Hamas are the same, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. That's not. And many Muslims, in order to be accepted in the discussion, they don't dare speaking about this. I'm sorry, it's a legitimate resistance. And to say it, I'm quoting the one who is praised now as the icon of human rights, Nelson Mandela, who said, we are not going to be free and truly free in South Africa until the Palestinians are going to be free. And these people were elected, so I talk to the elected people, and their resistance is legitimate. And he's right. Now you can disagree with the means, but you have to accept the resistance. The problem is that many of us today, in this discussion, we are so scared to be this. And this is where the young people, they are not going to trust us, and they are going to people who are going to say straight to the point, because we are not courageous enough to say the truth or to speak. So if there is no constructed political discourse on moral terms, what I'm saying is very moral. It's very moral, because what I'm saying, who are you praising in Britain? Who are you praising in France? The resistant. During the Second World War, the resistant was, these were the people who are the dignity of your country. So why is it now that you come and you say to all the resistant to oppression, you are terrorists? Because they are not protecting your interests. So you change the words depending on your interest. If you come with this, you know, there is a mayor in Belgium saying, this discourse coming from Tariq Ramadan is the best protection to terrorism and violence, because he's speaking by saying legitimate resistance, no blind violence, and then we have to have a moral resistance. And I think that this is where we don't have these voices coming from the Muslim communities. It's as if we are scared to differentiate. And when we don't have a political discourse, the void is going to be taken by people who are speaking in our name, but they are not responding to the need of the young generation. And the young generation, they want something which is substantial. Tell me what I do with discrimination. Tell me what I do with occupation. Tell me what I do with oppression. And say peace and love. And then you ask yourself why. So I would say that the moral framework should be here. Okay, quickly. 2 questions. Yes, I think that you are right, and it's very important for both scholars, so to speak, to know exactly the limits of their expertise. That's true. And I think the best way here is to bring them together as well, because this is where they can see the limits. And I can tell you, we did this with all the seminars that we had. It was quite clear that some of the scholars, they were feeling, I keep on repeating this because it was so obvious. When you speak with shuyukh, with shuyukh who were, trained in Islam, the way they speak about the West is quite dismissive. Put them with Western scholars, and you can smile. Because you see that there is a kind of a complex and a kind of, they want to convince them, and they like them, and at the same time they don't like the fact that they like them, as all of us from the South. Liking the West, but not liking the fact that we like, so it's schizophrenia. Anyway, so that's the reality. So when you bring them together, you can see here, the knowledge. It was the case in psychology. It was the case in economics, in media. Then we put scholars, and you can see that there is a gap here. So the best is for the scholars to be brought together and to have this dynamic, and this is where the people can get a sense of the limitations, because many of the shuyukh, they think that they know almost everything about economy or about medical sciences, and it's a problem. On the other side, you have some in their field, they know a bit of Islam, and they are becoming shuyukh and fuqaha. This is the reality of it. So I think that this is where it's very important to bring the people together and to work. We have to put the people in a situation where they are confident with their expertise and humble as to the limits of their expertise. So this is a setting. The people who are bringing them together, they should think about this. Acknowledging your knowledge and acknowledging, or making you acknowledge, without saying it, the limits of your knowledge. So this is what, this is why the form of the setting is as important as the substance, how you are coming to bring the people together to make them feel this. And the last question, which is a spiritual one. So, in Nur fil Qalb, which is, where are you? Yeah, it's true. In the mystical tradition, but it's also in the Islamic tradition, there is a word that is one of the names of the Quran, Al-Furqan, discernment, which is helping you to see the good, or to distinguish, or to have the perception of what is good and what is bad. And you are doing this with many dimensions of your being, your mind and your heart. إنها لا تعمى الأبصار ولكن تعمى القلوب التي في الصدور. It's not your eyes that are becoming blind, it's your heart. And many of the scholars, this is something which is, you have this in the Maliki tradition, but have it in all the tradition. You know that the great scholars, before even thinking about the fatwa, they were making ablution when they were to read the Quran, making, I should be in the spiritual disposition to read. It doesn't mean I'm going to read with my mind. I'm going to make the Quran accessible to my heart. So meaning that the fatwa is not an intellectual construct or product. It has to do with the heart. It has to do with the state. And many of them, the great fuqaha, were at the same time mystics. And they were in this, almost all of them. And if they were not in a circle, they were experiencing the spiritual dimension of what it means to extract a rule, because you don't extract a rule with your mind, you extract a rule with your spiritual being. So it's also your heart. So it means, what I was saying here is that this reconciliation is, how are you going to put some light in your heart? By sitting down and say, I'm waiting for the light to come? No. By changing your behavior. By going through this purification of the heart, which means change your behavior, your heart is going to be alive. Make your heart alive through your behavior. So, in fact, the more you change your behavior, the more you give light to you put some light in your heart, and the more you have this furqan, which is discernment. Sometimes you see, and this is the difference between a zahir wal batin. A zahir is the visible, the phenomenological dimension of the text. Al-batin is what is hidden within the text that you can get with your heart. And sometimes this intuition, this spiritual, what we call in Arabic, ilham, spiritual inspiration, it's coming with the scholar, it's coming with ordinary people. So I agree with you, but be careful. Not this at the price of all what is coming with it. Reforming your behavior, educating your mind, and knowing how you have to behave with your own body. It's a comprehensive approach. It's not one versus the other, which sometimes is presented by mystical groups by saying, no, the heart is everything. No, the heart, you know why the way I'm putting it, it's coming from my father, rahimahullah. Once he was very tired, and I came, and he told me something. I was very young, and it never left my mind. He said, you know what? Your heart is the light, your reason is the way. Yes. The light to know where you go, but the reason to know how to go with this light. So you need both. No light in your heart without some light in your reason, and no light in your reason without light in the heart. The light is giving you the way to look at things, to see things, and reason is helping you to follow the direction. Wallahu a'lam wa a'la wa ahkam. Assalamu alaikum. Sorry.